Chapter 4, Part 2, Expectations, Images, and Gender Identities. In this section, there are a number of questions that are asked that all fall into the category of what does it mean to be feminine? We will look briefly at a few of those topics. To begin, it's important to have a common understanding of a few terms. A schema is a mental framework or filter that guides the way a person processes incoming information. We all have self-schemas. A gender schematic individual is someone who easily and spontaneously organizes information on the basis of gender. For hundreds, perhaps thousands of years, the general notion was that masculinity and femininity were two polar opposites running along the same continuum. So let's look at androgyny, which is a combination of feminine and masculine qualities. Sandra Bem in 1974 developed the BSRI to measure psychological androgyny from a different perspective. It treats femininity and masculinity as separate, independent dimensions rather than two opposite poles of the same dimension. Take a look at the graph for a moment to better understand where you might fit. Moving forward to a deeper understanding of gender identity, it's important to break it down into three key areas. Gender identity, already identified. Gender roles, the roles that we're ascribed to by society of what it means to be male or female, again, that's social construct. And sexual orientation, our sexual and romantic attraction. Overlay that with the possible selves, the way in which an individual, you or I, pictures ourselves in various future roles. So how does an individual develop behavior patterns that are culturally acceptable for his or her gender? That is, how do they fit into the culturally approved gender role? Further, how does a child learn to think of themselves as gendered? The social identity that we make from the people we spend time with plays a critical role. We'll look at two examples. First, the Black racial identity. There's the pre-encounter stage, which absorbs many beliefs and values of the dominant white culture. It includes notions that white is right, that Black is wrong, and it de-emphasizes one's racial group membership. The encounter stage is often forced by events or series of events to acknowledge the impact of racism in one's own life and the reality that one cannot truly be white, and they're forced to focus on the identity as a member of a group targeted by racism. The immersion phase may simultaneously create desire to surround oneself with visible symbols of one's racial identity and an active avoidance of symbols of whiteness. Someone actively may seek out opportunities to explore aspects of one's own history and culture with support of peers from one's own racial background. Internalization comes when one is secure in their own sense of racial identity. Their attitudes become more expansive, open, and less defensive, and they may be willing at that point to establish meaningful relationships with white folks who acknowledge and are respectful of their own definitions. It's important to note that while I laid this out in just a few moments, it is not a simple process that is either fully conscious or unconscious and may last a brief time or a struggle that someone goes through their entire lives. When we begin to overlay the many issues and challenges that people of color have all around the world. My hope is merely to outline a process. The second identity formation we will look at is the lesbian identity formation. As you can see, it has a set of stages. Pre-coming out, which can include identity confusion, could I be gay, who am I? Identity comparison, maybe this doesn't apply to me. Self-alienation, how to deal with that. Identity tolerance, maybe I'm not the only one beginning to interact, engage. Identity acceptance, identity pride, identity synthesis, the coming out to someone, whomever that is. Having relationships, integrating fully into the community, and perhaps to the broader community. Again, this is a simplified version of something that may be much more complex or much less complex. There's been criticism of late that based upon much more recent research, this model is not valid today, as it was several years ago. It does not take into account the social cultural factors that can impact identity development. The nature of social stigmas and the management practices have changed since this model was created. And the linear nature of this model suggests that anyone who abandons the model or falls through or doesn't go through exactly these stages isn't well adjusted. And that's just not true. We live in a different space where being queer in many places, like here in Long Beach, is a much different experience than it was for people just 20 years ago. And there's good news out there. We're getting better at understanding and embracing diversity. We're getting better at looking at the vast dimensions of human beings in all their forms. We are taking time to look at the intersectionality, looking at the separate identities of individuals, not as additives, but as a full complement of everyone. And as such, there's an impact of change in our culture. Things have gotten better. And here's to hoping that they will continue to improve, and that the net of intersectionality and diversity and acceptance includes everyone.